Thinking about self-publishing and don't know where to start? Join the Spa Girls each week for a fun-filled podcast with honest advice, tips and resources. I'm Trudy J.
I'm Shah Barrett.
I'm Cheryl Phipps.
And thank you all for joining us for another week of the Spa Girls podcast. This week, we have an awesome editor with us today. We have Mary-Theresa Hussey from New York, who is also my editor. She's been helping me do some manuscript assessments on some of my books, and I'm super excited to have you here with us today, Matrice.
Yay, welcome.
Yay.
Thank you very much. Well.
Awesome. So I'm gonna read out your bio so everyone can understand how awesome and experienced you are, and then we're going to dig right into the editing topic today. So I think it's going to be an awesome episode. So everyone should be buckling in their seatbelts for an exciting time. Mary-Theresa Hussey, also known as Matrice, knew from the start that she loved the stories found in books, and that she didn't want to be a writer. So she became an editor, putting her love of books to good use by helping authors write better stories. Prior to becoming a freelance editorial consultant, she worked at Harlequin for more than 25 years, editing nearly 1,000 titles, which is amazing. As editor, senior editor, and executive editor, she read, acquired, revised, rejected, and critiqued triple that, which is even more amazing. Many of the books she has edited went on to find places in both the New York Times and USA Today bestseller lists. Matrice is also an award-winning editor, having won the RWA Vivian Stevens Industry Professional Award in 2015, the OCC Helping Hands Industry Award, Editor of the Year Award from the NYC RWA chapter, I'm assuming, and has edited multiple Rita nominees and winners, and National Reader's Choice Award nominees and winners, among others. So that's not even me listing all of them.
No.
So thanks for joining us today.
Yes.
Matrice.
Thank you for having me. I've been
Awesome. Okay, so first of all, can you just tell us how you a bit about your background, how you got into editing and where you've come from and how you got where you are today, basically.
Sure. As I said, I'm a longtime reader. I think loved books in general. My Nancy Drews, my Hardy Boys, the whole series books got me hooked when I was young, and I fell in love with category romances, Mills and Boons and Harlequins and Silhouettes, when I was visiting my aunt in Ireland, and she had a whole bag of Mills and Boons tucked away in the closet. I'd run out of things to read. I was 11 or 12, and she said, you can read these if you can, if your mother says yes. And my mom was just give her something to get reading. She's driving us crazy. So that started my love of category romances. My first check that I ever wrote was to join the Love Swept book club, so that I could get my regular Love Sweps in every month for years. And so I've always loved reading. I've always loved working with books. I've loved critiquing and commenting on them. When I was interviewed by Tara Gavin at Harlequin for the job as editorial assistant, she said I was the only person who had ever come into her office, looked at the Diana Palmer and Anne Major books on the wall, and knew the characters' names and other books that they had written in that series. So she knew from the start that I loved category romance and silhouette books and the authors that she loved in general. So I started with Silhouette, and which was part of Harlequin at that time, but run a little bit separately. Now, of course, they're really all Harlequin, and Harlequin is part of Harper. So over the years, things change in the publishing industry, in particular, conglomerations and merges and all the rest of it. So I was with Harlequin, Silhouette Romance, Silhouette Special Edition, Intimate Moments, Romantic Suspense, worked my way up the line. I worked on the Luna line, started it and edited probably like 85–90% of the authors that were published in Luna, and then also helped in the start of the Kamani line a little bit, and in the start of the teen line as well. So I did a lot of various titles and worked with a lot of fabulous authors over the years.
Wow, that's awesome. And now you're freelancing, you're out there in the world helping all sorts of people. I'm excited, including me.
Yeah. A lot of fun projects, very different. I will say the first time that I worked as a freelancer, so to speak, somebody had hired me to edit her manuscript and critique it. And I had written back, and she had, it was a really interesting manuscript. I enjoyed it, but she had like lots of apostrophes and the characters' names and interesting words and all the rest of it. So I said, okay, let's just take all of these out. She's like, no, I like it. But I'm like, but take the words out so that people will read it. And she's like, no, it's mine. And that was my first big mind blown element where I had been so used to over the years saying, okay, fix this. And people would fix it or change it, or we'd have a conversation about why it needed to be changed. And now she's like, no, I like it. I want it. And you're kind of like, it won't be good. Like, people will turn away from it. And so I learned that there's so much that I can do and bring forward. And it's much more of a dialogue when I'm working as a freelance editorial consultant. And I mean, of course, I always wanted to be a dialogue. Hopefully, you think so, Trudy, that, we go back and forth on things, but, it's much more of that. I don't really do it that way. And they don't do it that way, which is kind of interesting just because they feel like it without having a solid, motivation or a real good reason for keeping things that are perhaps not the most commercial way to develop the story.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. That is an interesting, because I was going to ask you about, like, so you were acquiring all these titles for Harlequin, and is that the main difference that you would say between being part of at Harlequin versus working with authors, or are there similarities as well? Like, you're still looking for a good story, or is it a different? Are you looking for different things?
When you're, as some of you know, when you're writing category romance, it's kind of restricted in some ways. I used to compare it to a sonnet in that you had to hit a certain rhyme scheme, you had to have a certain number of things happen, you had to have the ending, you had to have the pattern together, but within it, you can be, romantic suspense or cute or sexy or funny or whatever it is, as long as you hit the beats in the romance area, in particular in category romance. And when you're working on more freelance projects or self-published projects, the authors might have a one book in them, or might have a series in them, or might have an idea for something that is not necessarily commercially, I won't say that it wouldn't be commercial, but it's not easily commercial. It's a little bit more idiosyncratic. It's a little bit more unusual. It's breaking the rules of the genre that they're writing for. And so it can be more of a stretch. And so that tends to be a little bit more of a negotiation when, they want to have different qualities or categories that's not in the typical historical novel or things, and you kind of have to negotiate with them, and they negotiate themselves. Like, this is going to throw off a bunch of readers. Is it worth alienating X number of readers if Y number of readers find it interesting, and how does the balance work between it? So it tends to be more of, I'm in it for a short time period. When I was with Harlequin as well, I was in it from the concept of the book, through the editing of the book, through the back cover copy, through, all the different stages of the book, consulting on the cover and all the rest of it. And now I come in for a very narrow portion of the book. So I don't see your back cover copy necessarily, or your covers, or although some authors will share their covers and copy, and I'll often do a little rewrite or fix up of a copy that they're having trouble with, or I work more on query letters than I do, on for some authors than anything else. So it's a different mindset. And in a sense, it's more limiting. There's less freedom to interfere with the author's career and have feedback. And I'm coming in for a little element, important element, I think, but for one element within the whole career of the author. So it is a very different attitude and a feel from my end. You and I, we've worked on 5 books so far. Yeah. So, I think we've got a good give and take and expectation, but for a lot of authors, I'm in for just one project and that's it. So it does have a different feel.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, so anyway, so that's I'm just the what you're doing for me and how it's all working. I think it's great, and I think it's awesome for especially self-published authors to be able to have that person come in and kind of give them that advice. And you've got so much experience in terms of that traditional publishing kind of, and you're not just looking at the grammar, but you actually have that wider knowledge of like, hey, does this quite fit into the genre that you're aiming for? That's kind of worthwhile experience for authors to kind of pay attention to. So I think that adds actually a really awesome dimension to what you're providing. So yeah. Good. Okay, so actually what we wanted to talk about today was it's almost like what you would recommend as an editor for the self-editing process before it comes to you. So we've got 2 kind of top 5 things that we're going to go through. The first one is 5 big things about writing books, which is just your general kind of advice. And then the next 5 are the 5 picky things from an editor's perspective, which I'm excited by. But let's look at the first 5, which are the big things. So do you want to take us through? So start at number 1 and go from there. What are they?
Sure. One thing I'd like to, I know writers struggle with this, and I know readers find it extremely important figuring out where to start your book. Like, you want to open up that book and immediately become enraptured by the scene, the setting, the characters, the emotions. I used to work with one author back in the Harlequin days, and she was a little late on her book, and then she was a little later on her book, and a little later on her book, and I was like, please, when am I getting this book in? And she's like, I'm still waltzing with the chapters. And I'm like, waltzing with the chapters? And she's like, yes, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. She's done 10 different drafts of 1, 2, 3, and she can't start to chapter 4 until she's got the first 3 chapters in her mind. And only then will she be able to go on to the rest of the book. And I think,
Wow.
I will say, when she got those first 3 chapters done, the book was done in like under a month, because she knew so well who these characters were, how they interacted, what their conflicts are, all of that together. So once she got those first 3 chapters, she flew through. But if you weren't as strong an author as she was, and if you weren't as strong a storyteller and confident in yourself, getting yourself bogged down by those first 3 chapters can ruin the book for you. It can lose all the mystery, it can lose all the tension, it can lose all the characterization. So I always say it's very important to have strong first 3 chapters, but what's even more important is to get to the end of the book and then go back and look at those first 3 chapters, because what you thought was so important in those first 3 chapters, by the time you get to the end of the book, might not matter as much, because the conflicts have changed, the characterization has changed, the interaction between the hero and heroine has changed. So yes, take care, do a strong opening, get to the back of the book, and then rewrite those first 3 chapters, I think, is really what I'd recommend if you're at all feeling stuck on a book or a project.
I've heard often the advice, especially for beginning authors, that write the whole book and then you probably have to cut the first 3 chapters or 5 chapters, and you actually have started in the wrong place. Is that, you're not
that often, I think that's pretty true. And that's why I say don't struggle over the first 3 chapters to that extent, because it might be chapter 4. So I was working on a project the other day, and it was one of those where the heroine was on a plane ride and reflecting back on what brought her to this plane ride, and returning home after all this time away, and all of the rest of it. And then she goes and drives up to the parents' house, and she's thinking about, other things that happened. And I'm pretty much like, delete all of that. Like, we don't need that. We don't need this drive. We don't need this journey. We don't need all these flashbacks. We want her knocking on the door saying, hello, I'm home. And that's the part where the book really starts. So, the key thing about starting a book is, when did that person's life change? So you want as little before, when it was normal, so you get a little glimpse of what was normal, but then you want the moment of change that's in the character's life, the moment of awakening, the moment of surprise, the moment of conflict, and that's when the story really starts. And sometimes you won't figure that out until you're into the middle of the book or the end of the book, and then have to come back to it.
Yeah, that's very true. So anything else for that one to add, or are we?
I think that's the essential element of it. Do you guys agree? Is it the same with you?
Yeah. I've just read I started reading a Colleen Hoover book, and it's literally that, like, she's on a rooftop thinking by herself, but actually about something that happened at her father's funeral. She did this terrible eulogy that was kind of like for this father she hated, and kind of shocked the audience. And it was like, and so instead of starting at the funeral and where she was giving this shocking eulogy, Colleen started it actually with, and it makes sense in context of what you're talking about. I know why she started it where she started it, because that was all just the backstory, and you kind of get into the, Okay.
So I think, so that's one of those, don't start in transit for the most part, I'll say. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways you shouldn't start, but don't start in transit is one of the easier ways, because all it is, and I guess along that is don't have a number of false starts. One of the other favorite things that I've read with a lot of authors is the author wakes up, has, something exciting is happening, and the author wakes up and it's a dream. And then she reflects back on what happened, and then she moves forward. So you've actually started the book 3 different times for the reader. You've introduced the character as the dream. You've introduced the character as waking up and thinking about the dream. And then you've actually started the book later on. And these false starts can be effective if you know what you're doing and if the story is right. But often what happens for the reader, it's like, what? Still no story? Still no story? Still no story? And they get impatient to figure out when the story is actually starting. So, flashbacks in media res, flash forwards, all of those things can be used, but use them judiciously and make sure that it fits in with the story you're telling and the type of character and plot you have too. Just don't throw them in willy-nilly to give a moment of drama. I mean, if you can't come up with drama for your characters, then think harder and do a little bit more rewriting rather than just throwing in some artificial drama.
Yeah, no, that's good. Perfect. I think that's all very good advice. The other one would be don't start by describing the weather.
Oh, yeah. Well, unless you're like Conroy and doing the low country of South Carolina and the waves sleeping in it. If you're doing that type of story, then yes, the weather might fit into it along with the landscape. But yeah, really, you have to be doing a particular type of story and be a particular style of author in order to get away with beautiful language for that.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, so what's the next big thing to think about as an author?
I think, it's really important to look at each scene individually as well as part of the whole book. So each scene should have energy in it and conflict and serve multiple purposes. So it should be serving the plot and the character. The character should be making decisions within the story. Things need to be happening to the character. Things need to be blocking the character. Conflict needs to be appearing. Every once in a while, you can have just a nice, depending upon the type of story you're writing, you can have a nice fun scene of them sitting around chatting. But even if they're just sitting around chatting, use that element to reveal the story, reveal the conflict, give a deeper insight into who the character is and what this story and what this scene is all about. If you have a lot of scenes that just don't go anywhere, that's a problem. And that's often what happens with the middle of the book when it gets a little saggy. The characters are just talking about things and not actually doing things and experiencing things. So look at your scenes and kind of make sure they're doing at least double duty, if not triple duty, in revealing something to the author, revealing something to the reader, so that there's some excitement and tension that's happening in each story. I saw Mickey Spillane. I don't know if you've ever read Mickey Spillane. He's a hard-boiled detective novelist from the 60s and 70s and such. And I loved Mike Hammer and Tiger Man and all of those characters. But one of my favorite quotes, I saw him speak once, and one of my favorite quotes is he sells the first line of the book in order to sell that book, and he writes the last line of the book in order to sell the next book. And I think kind of keep that in mind with your scenes and your chapters as well as your book. Like, make sure your scenes start.
I see, good point. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Make sure your scenes start with something that's a little dynamic and never let your scene end on something that gives the reader permission to close the book and go to do something else. You want them to be resisting that urge to close the book. You want them resisting that urge to just say, oh, it's fine, or oh, I'll pick it up tomorrow, the rest of it. You want to do, and I mean, it suits some types of stories, thrillers or romantic suspense and all of those is definitely more suited to having that individually dramatic chapters. But, even just posing a question, restating the conflict, when you're having the scene ending, give a bit more of an emotional weight to the character whose point of view it is or who's a little bit more vulnerable. All of those points are really useful in commanding the scene, capturing the reader's attention, and making sure that something is happening at the end to keep them flicking the screen, turning the page, whatever, listening to the audiobook, whatever it is to go on to the next element. So that I think is the author's job, is never give permission to just close the book. Just always make it regret that they're closing the book at this particular point because they have to sleep or work or get off the bus or whatever.
I like that. Make them regret having to close the book. That's an awesome line.
Don't have them falling asleep peacefully, the character.
Yeah.
That's a good time to put the book down, isn't it?
You want the bedroom door to suddenly creak open and a weird thing be.
I think Trudy, we had one of your books where within the heroine didn't she get knocked unconscious like 4 times at the end of the chapters 3 or 4 times at various times. Kind of,
And that was
okay.
And that was, I was going to say that was something that you definitely like again and again. I get a comment, maybe stronger ending, Trudy. Maybe we could do a stronger ending in this chapter. And I'm like, oh, yes, all right, then fine.
Does this woman not have concussion?
Yeah, and it's funny what you don't notice, right? Like until you're actually like there's the writing process and you just write. But I think with part of the editing process that is actually going back and being analytical about what is happening in each of those chapters and what does happen at the end of them, and having to focus and say, okay, so 4 times getting knocked out might be a little bit much, and maybe she needs to go see the doctor now to get medication for a concussion or whatever, so that is a really important part of that editing process. And it's not actually, to be honest, it's not, I never noticed it, right? Like, so me as the author, it wasn't something that I even thought of, and it was only when Matrice came in and said, actually, Trudy, maybe
when you're looking for things that you do wrong or you could do better, something like that, repetition like that, it's not an easy thing to check, is it? It's like, I think sometimes when you read something that you've written as an author, you don't remember whereabouts you wrote it. So the fact that you've written it 4 times kind of melds into one, doesn't it, really?
Oh, yes. So I that's one big thing that I definitely have, I feel like I'm working on better, is that idea of kind of checking at the end and making sure that there's a really strong ending of each chapter and each scene. I think that's really important. Who else? I was watching R.L. Stein. He did a session for Masterclass for I think it's called Masterclass, right? And he said exactly the same thing. I mean, I know it's kids' books, it's his Goosebumps series, but that's what he does. Every single chapter, he makes it so they can't stop reading. They have to keep going. They have to take one more chapter. So it's the same kind of deal. Yeah. All right. So what's the third thing that you want to talk about?
I said create vivid characters who act and make decisions, and making the reader care about those characters. And I think, that's something that could be done in a lot of different ways that you're doing it. One thing in particular, if you're a beginning writer and you just don't understand, what you're doing anymore, I think taking a picture out of a magazine or the internet, or putting something up on there to remind you of the hair length or the hair color or the eyes or the attitude, and taking 3 or 5 words and putting them up next to that character. So when you look at that character, you see feisty or lonely or vulnerable or protector or whatever it is, I think is something that's really useful. I know that there are long pages of what the whole background is, and sometimes that's useful. I wouldn't necessarily need to do it all the time, but if you are that type, and I know the Myers-Briggs is not real science, but it is kind of a handy typing in which you can look at the character and see who is protector, where is their energy coming from, are they internal or external, how will this character react, what are the points that make decisions for them. So having an idea of their Enneagram, which there's only 9 different Enneagrams, or their Myers-Briggs or something along those lines for your main characters. So when you're at a point in your book where you're kind of like, how would my character react? You can see what they look like, and maybe they're tiny and they might duck under something, or maybe they're big and they'll step over something or bull through the wall, or maybe they're vulnerable and they'll retreat and have to think about it, and maybe they'll put on a performance and move forward. So, if you have that in front of you, when you're stuck with a character, then you can look there and say, this is how my character would react, and this is some of the background, and make them move forward. So I think, trying to individualize it for each character, and making sure if you have a hero and heroine that they have different qualities, and that some of those qualities will clash, but not be such total opposites that you're like, oh, these people are not going to last more than, one book or the rest of it. There has to be some areas where they'll get together again.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of that, of having the words, because you can start out in a book with a character and not really have it fully formed, and then you have them doing weird stuff that doesn't make any sense in one part of the book versus another, because of a plot point rather than what the character would do. So having like 5 words, even just to, feisty, whatever, that kind of is a neat way to be reminded what that character would do, because that's who people connect to, right? Like it's the character.
Yes.
That's who the readers are reading for. That's who they don't want to leave the book for, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, with your character Hazel, you gave her glasses, which is fairly
Worst
unusual.
idea ever. I'm the only person on this podcast right now who doesn't wear glasses. And anyway, sorry, keep going.
But you have those little points where they start falling and she has to put them up, or they get fogged, and that's really vivid for the character. And it is kind of unusual because you usually don't go into that, but it makes Hazel very vivid in who she is, or those reactions, or she has to take a moment and smash her glasses back up or forward, and it gives her something to do, and it makes it distinctive. So yes, I know we went back and forth. You went back and forth on that a little bit, but it worked out well.
Yeah. It was an attempt to give her something different. That was yeah.
I think you're associated with high intelligence too, Trudy, just saying. Glasses wearers. So
you are digging into my triggers there, because I've always wanted glasses. I feel like it makes people look smarter, and I've got damn my 2020 vision.
give it a few more years, babe. You'll be there with the reading glasses that you wear.
Exactly.
Never had them. In particular, wearing masks. You never want to be wearing masks and glasses.
No.
As we all know from these past years.
Yeah. Well, my daughter wears glasses, and that's her eternal problem, is having to wear mask and glasses at the same time at school. Can you imagine? Anyway, yes. Okay. So anything else to mention on creating vivid characters? Like any tips on how to do that? Like adding the glasses? Are there other things that like often people talk about like an emotional wound, or having those kinds of things? Is that something you think needs to be worked out before, or just?
I think it's helpful in giving some of the background information. Just just be a little cautious that you don't use the same kind of emotional wounds, and that you're not fridging another woman or a character, or the hero always has to have a woman who dumped him in the back, or a woman who died in the back that he couldn't save, and all the rest of it. And so that there's variety in the story and in the conflicts. And depending upon the story that you're writing, it doesn't necessarily have to be a major issue for the character, but it is something that should be specific for him in a way, rather than just a general thing. Things that make him the youngest in his family, or the oldest in his family, or the one who went into the military when his parents didn't want it, or something along those lines, is something that's going to make his reactions individualized. And then for you as the author, try and keep it as instinctive as possible, so that this guy, how he'll react, or you'll what he looks like, and that's kind of the key to make it vivid and bring some of that back in there.
Yeah, and I think it's like the idea of you talk about the lists of things that people fill out, all the character sheets and stuff like that, and like, for example, knowing their shoe size is not necessarily a really important piece of information, unless they've got really big feet that they can never find shoes for, and it becomes a plot point. Then that's important. But otherwise,
unless they're the murderer and they leave a footprint.
Yeah,
or the Cinderella.
Cinderella. So if it's those stories, then it's important. But there's information that's important and vital to the story, and is going to inform the character, and there's information that's just not as important, that you don't need to worry about.
I mean, it's even that Lee Child's Jack Reacher, who but like, and it's like, oh yeah, he goes to at one point he's 6'7" and he's broad and he's big and all of this, but he can also seem to go to any Goodwill and find clothes to fit. And like, how did that really balance? Like, I really liked it in the TV series that was on. He went to a store and found a football player's who hadn't picked up his outfit, and got a nice suit that still didn't fit him well, but at least it was a Giants or Jets linebacker who
is going to be big.
Exactly, something big. But if you go into your average Goodwill store in Florida, I'm not sure that you'll find a clothes that'll fit a 6'9" kind of guy.
And on the TV series too, it was like he'd find this t-shirt and it was like too tight on him, which kind of worked because he's this big muscly guy, and we're all going but it's kind of part of that storyline too, where he can't find things to fit him. And that's why people objected so much to Tom Cruise playing him in the movies, because his size was such a big part of who he was in the books that it made no sense that a small man like Tom Cruise was playing him. So it's amazing how those kind of things become important in the mind of the reader. And that's and it is the characters that they're reading for after all. Right?
Yes.
I think that's the main part. Is there anything else to add in terms of the characters, or should we go to the next?
No, I don't think so. Unless, yeah, I think that well, I mean, there's tons you can add, but I think for this point,
I think that's a great point to
yeah.
start.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the next big thing for reading?
well, it also is something to do with characters, but it's not to make it easy for your characters, and your characters need to have some kind of arc from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. I mean, even if you're writing a series, unless you're writing like a cozy mystery where it doesn't really change at all, there should be some progression from the beginning to the end of where the characters are, and a change to the conflicts and a change to the attitudes. And one of the things that I always say is the problem comes when you see the conflicts as a race course where they just go round and round and round, and they come back to the same conflict and they come back to the same conflict, which makes sense for if you're telling the story quickly, but it's also frustrating for the reader because it's like, don't they grow? Don't they change? So my suggestion is always to make it a vortex. So, if you're on the first round, then the next one, raise it up 10 feet. So like they're looking at the conflicts from a different area, raise it up another 10 feet. They're looking at the conflicts from a different area, and keep rising it so that there's a different perspective. And maybe the conflict is that your father abandoned you. And the next one, well, he abandoned you, but he abandoned you because he had to go save somebody else. And by saving somebody else, he did this thing. And so he still abandoned you, but you're changing your attitude to why he abandoned, and you're growing as a person. So, that raising it into a vortex, rising the conflict up as a parking structure, or however you want to do it, is much more effective for the reader than somebody who's stuck on the same point time after time after time and doesn't have any growth.
Yeah.
I love that vortex imagery. That actually makes so much sense, because
Yeah.
it can be so difficult because you're kind of, I think we sometimes apply the rules of real life because often things aren't resolved in such a neat way. So it's sort of quite hard to keep moving forward, shall we say, through things.
Yeah. And I've heard the advice to kind of escalate it each time, like you have a problem, and then the next moment, the next critical point is a bigger problem, but actually the idea of the vortex, and it's the same problem but like escalating it or looking at it from a different perspective, is actually quite a powerful way to look at it. I really like that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly if you're doing a thriller, then yes, making it bigger or blowing it up, or there's a new body found. But when you're writing a romance, or when you're writing a fiction or a contemporary type story, that extra blowing it up bigger doesn't necessarily make sense within the context of the story you're writing. So you need to look at it in a different way to keep it personal, but also allow the character to change and grow a little bit, so that, by the end of the story, it's not they've done one more lap and, the conflict is gone, but, the third or fourth lap means I can let this go, I can put this behind me, and I'm ready to turn off the race course or turn into some new direction, and have a new set of problems. But that's one thing that you can kind of let go of. And I think, it could be with the internal conflicts and the external conflicts, and just a sign of the character growth and arc when you're going through it. Because I think it's important to have that in and out, that change and progression, so that when you get to the end of the story, you've grown with the character a little bit, and you've seen why they've grown, and you're more confident that they'll have a stronger future for themselves and with their partner.
Yeah.
In a romance, Matrice, would you say that both characters have to have the same level, if you like, of character growth, or does it tend to be one or t'other, like one of the two?
I think they both need character growth, but I don't know that it has to be a fully level. I mean, if you're taking a traditional kind of story in which you have grumpy hero and perky heroine, by the end, you've got to have grumpy hero lighten up again, and perky heroine understand that, keeping it, that there's time for serious things, or that, she's can overcome it, or she has to make it, whatever it is that the conflict is going to be. So, they might not go full out for the entire book. But I do think both of them need to have some element of growth. Like, nobody is perfect, and perfect characters are frustrating in a different way. So there needs to be some elements that are going to be able to tweak or to change or to develop. But no, I don't think, if the one's father abandoned him and the heroine's twin sister died in a car accident that she drove, and there's tons of drama all over the place. It's gonna, the author's gonna have a lot of work in order to do justice to both sides of it and to balance it. So I don't think both of them need to have incredibly fatal flaws, but I think both of them have to have flaws that will help with the other one.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not a competition for, you know,
No.
orphaning up kind of thing.
It's
Yes.
just a way to create tension and conflict, isn't it? Really, just to
Yeah.
give them their flaws.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And it's not just kill your darlings, which is kill off the sentences, but it's actually not to. If Wendy was here, because Wendy always likes to try and be nice to her characters, and we're always saying, be mean to your characters. Come on, do some mean stuff. Yeah, and that's kind of what that is, right? You've got to create something for them to, an arc, right? Like there's no arc, there's no story if there's nothing for them to overcome or grow through or become better people because of. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things I've always loved, but I've grown to love it even more, is reading Reddit am I the asshole kind of things, or advice columns, or Ask a Manager. I read Ask a Manager every day. She's my favorite columnist, and all of those. And what you're rooting for is for the person who made a mistake to get better, or for the person who was horrible to have a comeuppance, and keep that balance going. I mean, we have that sense of Schadenfreude of seeing when somebody is bad and becomes good, or somebody is rescued. And I think that's the kind of thing that as authors you're bringing to the thing as well. Like, how can you hurt your characters so that they can be rescued? How can you give them some pain that they can overcome and show their own strength? So, you know, I understand. And if you're writing a light, fun, frothy romance, maybe, you know, when he doesn't have to go quite as deep. But even then, you know, the ability to pick yourself up and show your pluck is something that will make readers identify with it as too.
Yeah. I mean, I know maybe some people enjoy a story where it ends dark, but I think most people want there to be kind of like good overcoming evil, or, you know, the person who's been wronged kind of coming out top on the end, and the bad guy kind of getting their comeuppance, right? Like, we don't, as much as that might not be real life, I don't know, but it's what we kind of want in a book mostly. Like, I do anyway. That's what I want to see, you know. Yeah. So,
and if in romance particular, one of my favorite things was always the good grovel. Like if the hero was an typical present-y alpha hero, mean, horrible kind of guy, he needs to apologize at the end. He needs to get down on his knees. He needs to admit he's wrong. And the heroine, you know, has the ability, she'll forgive him. Sometimes I don't wish she wouldn't, but she forgives him. But, you know, that's the kind of overcoming obstacles that makes you want to think that this couple will work together, or that, you know, you've got that sense of, yes, it was horrible, but, you know, he apologized and things will be better now, rather than, you know, somebody who just merely assumes that, you know, he doesn't need to apologize and just continues on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so we've got the last one. Oh no, are we up to the last one? Oh no, I'm looking at the wrong list. Yes, we are up to the number 5. What is number 5?
So I put know your audience, but listen to your gut, which is something that perhaps a beginning author might have a little more trouble with, because they might be all listening to your gut instead of knowing your audience, and something that a more experienced author might be focusing on knowing your audience and not listening to your gut. So I think you're going to have problems with both of them at various stages in your career and with various stages in the book. So it is something that you're going to need to balance and understand where it fits for you in particular. But, you know, you need to be able, if you're writing a romance, you need a happily ever after or happily for now. So that is a guarantee for a romance genre. But if you then switch it and you're writing women's fiction, then, you know, that's going with your gut in a different way, but you can't call it a romance. You need to call it women's fiction and kind of leave things a little bit more open-ended in some kind of story. So I think it's just the balance you have to writing the story of your heart versus writing the story that's going to sell, writing a story that's commercial and it's going to hit the the target that you want to hit, but also stands out a little bit and has your own voice and something of yourself in it. So that's not something an editor can really help you with, except pointing it out when you're going far off field, perhaps, or trying to brainstorm something that will be a little bit different within the normal confines of the genre. But I think it's something that when an author is writing her book, she's going to need to keep that balance in with the tone of the story, the type of story, the genre of the story, but also surprising herself and surprising the direction of the story. I have one author I used to work with, and I still work with her, but she would write, 120,000, 140,000 word manuscripts. And I'd be like, okay, I need a synopsis to do the story. And she'd send me the first 60 pages. And she's like, I know what the ending is, but you can't tell me because I can't tell you, because if I tell you, then I won't want to finish the book because it'll be resolved already. So I have to kind of make up what the ending of the book in the back of a copy and what the story is all about without actually knowing it, because if she tells herself the end of the story, she's lost interest in the book. So, it's kind of a balance that she's learned to write, in that, she knows where she's going. She knows the mood of the story. She knows vaguely how it's going to end. But if she actually wrote out a synopsis, that book would never get written because she'd have lost all interest in it. And that's kind of what you've got to figure out for yourself, what your own comfort zone is, what your own writing zone is. I work with another author who, they meet at Panera once a week and write at separate tables, and then just meet up and talk for a few minutes and then write at separate tables again with her critique buddy. And they can't be together, but they're in the same room. Or somebody else who Zooms, like they'll have the Zoom on with somebody else. They're working on their manuscript, not talking, but they hear the other person type tapping away, and that's enough for them to give it. So you have to figure out what's going to be your process. Are you a pantser or are you a plotter? And you're going to have to take a little bit of the other bit on in order to make the story really sing. It's the balance of storyteller and craftsperson. And that's one of the things when we were at Harlequin was always one of the more frustrating types of stories to get, where it was technically perfect. Like the story worked, it had a good beginning, good end, but the magic of the story wasn't there. Like the manuscript worked, but it didn't sing for a romance reader. And that's something that's really tough. I mean, people think romance is easy, but it's not, because you've got to get that short period, hit all those points, and also make the characters sing and make it a storyteller. And I think that's one of the things that authors need to work on, like what's going to be their way to make their story sing.
Yeah.
Sage advice. And thank you for saying that about romance. I'm seeing a few comments these days on writers forums saying that, the old happy for now or happy ever after, it's old hat. Romance should be able to, end with a tragedy. And those of us that have been around for a while are saying, write what you want, but just don't label it romance, because that's not romance. It's like trying to write a murder mystery without a murder or a mystery. You can just set it in a spooky place, but that doesn't make it a murder mystery. But so thank you for that.
I still love romances. I still work on them. I still read them for pleasure. I still love that type of story. And there's nothing that beats that emotional satisfaction of overcoming it and believing in the happily ever after.
Absolutely. It's delivering a delightful dose of hope and happiness. And goodness me, don't we need that? So
yeah, and it's funny because there's a impression that maybe writing a romance is easy, and I actually think the romance angle of writing is actually the hardest part, like getting that right, and it's almost like, because there's this magic involved, like you were talking about, like it's not just about insert A into B or anything like that. It's the magic of it, like there's more to it than that. It's the magic of two people kind of meeting and falling in love, and that's not easy to write about. So yes, it's interesting. So you have to know your audience, but listen to your gut. I find that
I love that.
I used to say I have read probably more bad romances than almost anybody I know who isn't an editor and things like that. And I've read bad mysteries and all the rest of it. But, at the end of the day, if you're reading a bad romance, there is a positivity about the characters getting together, or overachieving things or looking to the future that you don't really get in every other genre. So, you know, if you have to read bad book after bad book, at least in the romance, you don't feel depressed at the end of it most of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's positive.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yay, romance. All right, let's move on to the next list and see if we can get the other 5 picky things done before our time is up. I'm sure we can do it.
Yeah, these
right?
are a little bit easier, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So 5 picky things from an editor's perspective. Go.
All right. One of the things that I push back a little bit is POV switching. Be sparing about it. I am not a total purist. Like, you know, I'm totally open to having different points of view in the book, in the scene, in the chapter, depending upon what goes. But if you are casually head hopping or breaking POV, I find that I have to stop and recalculate in my mind as a reader, who is talking at this point, who is the one who's vulnerable, who is the one who is going back and forth on it. And I that slows me down as a reader. So, you know, if you want to throw the dog in, or if you want to throw, you know, the neighbor in, or give a comment here and there, make sure that it's done for a reason, that it's done clearly, that it works within the story. But for the most part, try and not head hop, try and keep to one point of view within the scene as much as possible, and make it whoever is most vulnerable in that scene. And that's what's going to draw the reader along with you, and, you know, not have to make the reader stop and think about what's happening or who's speaking or where the story is going at that point.
Because as soon as you do anything that distracts the reader, it pulls them out of the story. And that's what you don't want. Yeah. So I think that's the thing with point of view. Maybe some authors or early authors are thinking, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, point of view, what is it? But it's the pulling the reader out of the story and having to think, oh, who was this speaking again? That's the problem.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'll put a subnote under that one. It's like when you're using dialogue and you're using said, which I'm totally, you know, said is better than all the Tom Swifties and all the rest of it. But, you know, you definitely need to have repeat names if you're jumping point of views and all the rest of it. But being able to tag it with an action tag instead of a dialogue tag, and really, you know, make sure that the reader knows who's speaking and who's interacting and who's going on the scene is another key thing for a writer to do.
I read a book once, and I'm not saying that I can't remember the name, and I'm pretty sure it was written years and years ago, and it had the dog point of view, but I only realized that after I'd read the opening sentence was, he licked himself and then considered her carefully, and I was like, well, this is an interesting hero. And it was the dog. I'm just glad that, well, they didn't specify where he licked himself first before considering it. Sorry, just a side note.
It's true. It's true. And well, Nora Roberts did it once famously in an early Silhouette special edition, and so that was like, but Nora Roberts did it. I'm like, if you can write like Nora Roberts, dog's point of view in every book. But
yeah, absolutely.
You know,
yeah.
Yes.
Because Nora's a bit of a head hopper. She definitely does.
She
head
is.
hopping, but she's a pro. She knows what she's doing. And
Nora can do anything she wants. She is a goddess, and
Nora can
we
publish
aren't.
a shopping list, as they say. Because I've just heard her as an example of someone who head hops. When you say to something, I'll try not to do that, they're like, oh, but Nora does it, and it's like,
yes, and she does it well, and you know, even then, she does it to illustrate an element of the scene, not just because, oh, it'd be nice to have this happen. Like there's a purpose. And I think that's kind of the key element. If there's a purpose to it, I'll buy into it a lot more often. I was reading a well-known book. It was National Book Award winner, you know, best book of the year from whatever, with my, just this past weekend with my book club. And I was like, there was a lot of head hopping in the book, and it drove me crazy. And they're like, but it explored the characters and it gave different elements, and it's like, yes, it did. But I just, this won awards, and it's, you know, best book of the year, blah, blah, blah. And it drove me crazy because it just head hops so often. And yes, it served a purpose, but I was like, okay, next I'm going to just audiobook this, and maybe it won't bother me as much as reading it with that kind of attitude and style in it. But
I even struggle if there's too many characters. Like I don't like like I've got a favorite author, and she wrote this series. It's like, and it was different main characters each time, and then she wrote a 9th book in the series, and it was like the culmination, and it kind of took every single character who'd been in and they all had their points of view, and I just find it distracting. I can't read it. I can't connect and go deep with the characters if there's too many of them. And I mean, and other people love that book, so it clearly there's part of this that might be a bit of about your preference, but I just think the fewer characters you have, the deeper you can go with those characters, and the more you can be connected, and yeah. Okay, so number 2, what are we?
Well, kind of along your lines a little bit, is one of my little bugaboos is don't have everybody have the same initials, because I do a list when I'm editing a book or reviewing a book or critiquing a book. I do a list of people's names, and it's amazing how many names start with Jane or M or K. Like J, K, and M seem to be the most popular ones. And so they have name after name where it's Jane and Jessica and Jeremy and John and Jack and Jimmy and John Jack. And you're like, well, you have a John, a Jack, a Jimmy, and a James. Like, can you not change some of these names? So yes, that's one of the things that I would recommend. Take a look at whatever your most popular names are and change them up. Throw a W in there, an S, a L, a T, all sorts of letters of the alphabet. And you might
I have an alphabetical list that I make sure that I go through the alphabet, so I don't do that.
So that's a minor point, but and it's especially if you have your hero and heroine, or your main female protagonist and main male protagonist, however you refer them, starting with the same initials. If you have John and Jane as your main characters, like, why? You're just going to confuse the reader, you're going to confuse yourself, you're going to confuse the editor at some point. Give them very different names, give them different initial letters. I mean, yes, if you have, characters, kids who are twins, and they start with, Daisy and Duke or whatever it is. But, for the most part, you don't want to have your readers, again, it's a matter of having your readers stop and thinking, which character was this? And am I supposed to know who he is or she is at this point? And so anything that you can do to prevent that, I'm all for.
It's about making them distinctive. Then the number of times I've read through books and I'm like, I can't remember whether Bob or Brian was, like there's too similar and you can't figure it out. And it's like throwing people out again. Totally, I agree with that one too. Good.
Okay.
Glad
I agree with everything.
That's why we've got her on. She's freaking genius. Okay, number 3 of the picky things.
So there's 2 things. You'll find that there are a lot of authors have different word bugaboos that they just get stuck on, and that you might not know it, and you might know it yourself till the 2nd or 3rd time somebody's pointed out to you that this is your particular bugaboo, whether it be in description or using the words by chance or using the word smirk or something along those lines. And so if it gets pointed out to you, some people gets pointed out in one book, and so the next book they have a totally different bugaboo that they use all the time, and that's fine. But just keep in mind of what are the words or the phrases that you tend to use too often, and then do a quick search at the end and trim them down, get rid of them, see if you really need them. Along those lines, there are the crutch words that are like back, up, down, very, just, still, that, was. These words can be 400 times in a 200-page manuscript, and then it's probably a little too much, and sometimes it's definitely needed. And I think if you look at books that were written 10 or 15 years ago, you'll see that nobody is kind of cutting out the backs and the ups and the downs quite as much. But nowadays it's so easy to just do a search and replace and find the word down is used 300 times and just skim through and delete it, because if they sit, then they're sitting down. You don't need to have the word down there. If they're coming down a staircase, they can descend a staircase. Just throw a few looked up different words. In particular, if you're using it in the same paragraph or the same page every so often, just try and get a little variety in there, and then trim out the ones that are, if you're using it more than 150 times in a 200-page manuscript, that's too many, I think. And trim back on that.
Yeah, that's very true. I go through and do that. That is my one. And do you know what the other one I do is I'm adding extra words that don't need to be there, like a little bit. So I always take out a little, or kind of is another one I add lots and lots. Like I'm clearly very wordy and I have to cut back on those Yeah. So the other I was going to say is a word cloud. So you could put your chapter, I don't know if the whole entire manuscript would go into word cloud, but definitely chapters, and just see what the words are that you're using most commonly, and see if there's any of the ones that we've listed off that might be ones that you can get rid of. Yeah, like that. Or at least tell you, like, if you are using different words commonly in different manuscripts, then at least you'll know that you've used onomatopoeia 300 times in one manuscript, and maybe you need to, I don't know if there's another word for that, so
That one I'm not sure.
yeah.
Have you guys you also have words that you find Char, have you find a word that you use?
Just is my bugaboo, just. And so now I do a search, find or replace, but just another tool another tool is something like Pro Writing Aid, you know, which is like a self check-in that can bring up repetition. It's yes, it's very hard to see without some external eyes or help.
I'm like
sorry.
Yeah, looking. Look up, down.
You know, and it's in a similar vein. Mine was like, I was always saying she looked over at the thing, or she stared at the thing, and I kind of she saw that this thing was over there. There was a lot of visual, like, and I just realized I didn't need any of that, and I could just say there was something over there without having to say she looked over there and saw it, or whatever. Which is
and feeling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, sometimes those words are absolutely necessary.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's no need to get rid of every single one. But if you have more than 100 in a 50,000 word manuscript, you can trim it back. You can trim it down.
Yeah.
You know, if you have 100 in a 500 page manuscript, then that's not a problem.
Yeah.
But yet what you find is that they often are in the same paragraph even. And
yeah. That's always a surprise. That surprises me. I'm like, how did that get through? How did I write that?
Do you find that you start repeating, like there'll be one word, I won't repeat it anywhere else, and then I'll find one chapter where I've said it like 6 times or something, and it's like I got the word in my head, and then I just felt the need to keep repeating it because it was such a good word, and it won't be one of the, you know, common words like just and whatever. It'll be something that's like some random longer word that, and it's nowhere else in the book, but
I would say for anybody that's starting out writing, and I kind of put myself in that boat, is just get it written first, because if you're trying to think of all of this as you're going, particularly the repeating words thing, you can sit there for a half an hour staring at your screen trying to think of a way to say just in a different way. So it's just put your just in, just do it.
Yeah, and I guess that's the point of everything that we're talking about today, is all once you've written that first draft, I would be the best advice, especially if you're a starting out author, because otherwise you can get caught up in those first 3 chapters. If you're more experienced, like the one you talked about earlier, Matrice, who knew that she had to get that right to get going, but most of us, I think, just need to get the words down and then come back and look at it again.
Because once you take out all those justs or whatever word it is, you're going to do some rewriting, and you're probably going to put some of the bloody things back in again.
Oh, the joys of all those experiences.
I know. It's good fun.
Do you know, it's funny though, because I've got another friend who like, I'm always going through editing, taking words out, like I pull out as much as I can, and she's adding words in. I'm like, it blows my mind. Like that's what she's doing. It's a whole different mindset. But
I think that's the beauty of actually listening to how people write and how they self-edit and how they edit, how they're edited as well. You realize that there's so many different ways of doing it, and it's all fine, it's all okay. The goal is to get to the end product.
And it's a process, right? Like the writing doesn't come down from on high through the things and come out perfect. It's a process. It's something that we work on and make better. All right, so what are we up to? Number 4.
So 4 it's kind of fits along a little bit with that one. It says is learn what you usually get wrong and try and fix it for yourself, and keep trying to improve your understanding of grammar and developing your craft. So the frustrating thing for me, not with you, but with other people when I do a developmental edit.
All those other people, not me.
When I do a developmental and a line edit, in the developmental edit, I'll tell them, numbers need to be spelled out if they're under 100. If you have a comma, if you're having dialogue, use a comma, and then blah, blah, blah. And you go through this rule and that rule. And so I have like a half a page of, grammar things. I didn't fix it in the developmental edit, but these are the things that are issues. These are the things that are problems. These are things you want. One author misspelled literally at least 10 times. He misspelled necklace as in NECKLESS instead of NEKLACE.
Different
And
meaning.
so, I pointed out, and there was a couple of other words that he consistently misspelled. And so, I sent it off with developmental edit, and I came back to do the final edit, and he hadn't fixed any of those things. And I know I'm being paid to fix it as the editor and make those corrections, but after the 7th time necklace was wrong still, I'm kind of like, or the other words or all these other things that are going on, when you get feedback, you want to improve, you want to develop yourself, take the most common things and kind of keep them in mind, maybe not when you're writing, but when you're doing your own internal revisions, clean it up as much as possible for yourself and learn why the grammar is this way or why the craft is that way, because continue to read craft books because, you want to be able to improve yourself and you want to be able to break the rules knowingly rather than breaking the rules because, what if I'm not there to fix necklace, or what if I'm not there to put your commas in the right spot? You've got to be able to fix it yourself too.
Yeah.
And I also think from writer's perspective, author's perspective, if you're there having to fix necklace and other misspelt words or whatever, you're not going to be able to focus on other stuff to do with the writing. So you've got a certain amount of time and a certain amount of space to look at that writing. And if there's this, a whole bunch of stuff that you need to work on, you're going to do your best to get it to a certain level, but it's not going to be the same as if you had this manuscript come in at a higher level and you could work on it. I just think that's a really important thing to think about as well. Like you think, Tessa,
I agree.
Yeah, thank you. Good.
And it's such an easy fix. The old find and replace function on Word works really well, for example, just find necklace and replace it with necklace. It's
but it's those little things that you're trying to focus on, as you say, and develop on other things. But in the end I did that, but it's like just one more step of things you have to jot on your little paper of make sure you go through and find and replace this word and that word and this word and that word and all the rest of those. And
it is,
so it's always room for improvement. I'm always improving. I continually read websites and I read craft books myself, even though I'm not a writer, because I want to improve and sign up for Cam Weiland's plot and structure book or things along those lines, because I need to be able to talk to authors with knowledge and examples and understanding. But so I think it's always good to keep growing and experiencing it and try a different book and give an idea that maybe this particular book will work for you. It might not. And that's perfectly fine if, that plot book doesn't work for you and this structure book does work for you, or GMC is your be all and end all, which is fabulous. So there are all of those possibilities, but it's worthwhile to kind of look at the others and give itself a try before as you improve.
As somebody that's grammar shy, spelling's good. I passed the spelling test, but as a child of the 70s, we didn't get taught grammar very well here. So I'm really self-conscious about it. I know how things should, and so anyhow, are there any resources that you would recommend or any books? I've obviously Grammar Girl. I love Grammar Girl. I loved her before she right from the start. Is there something like should we be getting the Chicago Manual of Style, for example, and looking at the the
Chicago Manual of Style is great, but it's also really intensive, and I struggle with that myself. The Intransitive Vampire was really good. That
was the one I've got. I was just looking at my bookshelf.
Okay.
Where is it? Where's my
Intransitive Vampire? All right. Is that a book or a person?
A book.
Okay. I've had Eat Shoots and Leaves. I like that one.
Strunk and White, just Strunk and White Elements of Style for basic grammar stuff.
I tried Strunk and White, and I'm afraid that Mr. Strunk and Mr. White didn't do it.
Are not yours. But even if going through Stephen King's On Writing,
Yes.
you know,
yeah.
has a lot of good examples and
Yeah.
and things like that. The Forest for the Trees, if
yeah.
you're self-editing, things like that.
One site I did find, and I've actually got it bookmarked on my browser, is it's the Purdue, is it, I'm presuming it's how it's spelled, the university, and they have a online grammar lessons. I think it's grammar or it's punctuation. I'm not great at that either. So I don't know. I've gone through a few of those too for students.
For me, it's commas, because I swear, I don't know if this is a thing. I feel like commas are done differently in America versus
Yes,
Britain.
they are very much. You guys love your commas.
I'm always putting commas in, and then my editor comes back and is like putting them in different places and taking them out of other places. I'm like, I swear that was where you're supposed to put the comma.
I was taught you would never put a comma before an and. So you would never, ever do that. That was akin to not having a capital letter at the start of a sentence. And now it's,
Well, it depends.
Oxford
Sometimes
comma,
it
isn't it?
sometimes you do,
sometimes you don't.
Depends what the sentence is.
Yeah, I mean, the Oxford comma, that is the big one. Like, I do prefer the Oxford comma, as Eat, Shoots, and Leaves would agree.
Yeah, me too.
But Harlequin's rule style is no Oxford comma. So my mind shift goes back and forth between the two of those. The one I think I see most people get wrong or have concerns with is the compound sentence with the comma. Yes. So if there is a subject on both sides of the and or but, you need the comma. And if there is a subject on the first side but not on the second side, you don't need the comma. So that, I think, is key, is one of the key ones that I see people get wrong all the time. The one that I see, today I was reading a book, and it was mantle and mantle. So the cloak versus above the fireplace. So my little mnemonic for that is telephone, go above the fire escape. And so TEL goes above the fireplace. And then if it's TLE, you wear it on your shoulders. Or stationary. E is for envelope. So stationary with an E is envelope. And with an A, it's an altar. So you stay in the same spot. So yeah, there are a couple of little tricks for some of the more common ones, but it's amazing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, weirdly, I found some great English teachers on TikTok. Is an American lady who's amazing. I can't remember her handle offhand, but I will put it in the show notes. I've learned so much from her that I learned in 13 years of schooling. Like, she is amazing, and she does because I never knew what a compound sentence was from a block of chocolate, but I know what it should look like. I couldn't tell you how it's formed, and she's wonderful. She goes through them, and she's huge on TikTok. I love her. So just that's you get these little. Yeah, she's great. I'll send you her handle. She's wonderful.
I'm going to follow her now too, Shah. That sounds awesome.
One thing that I always remember that stuck in my mind, and it's funny what does over the course of your writing career, was grey, how to spell grey.
Yes.
And that it was A for America and E for Europe.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know that.
So I never get that wrong.
The other one is blonde, whether you put an E on it or not. And then I had an editor say it's E for women and no E for men. And then since then it seems to be that it's just been decided that that's sexist, and maybe it's just no E. I don't know.
I thought that was the French, how they have the feminine words.
Well, it was over the time, but the current recommendation from Chicago Manual Style in the past year or so is just get rid of the E, because it's, when we were at Harlequin, blonde was with an E was a noun. So the blonde walked into the room, and then blonde with the hair as an adjective would have no E. So she'd have blonde hair, no E. So that was when I was at Harlequin. Now, I don't know what Harlequin is doing now, but the current recommendation for Chicago Manual Style is just get rid of the E entirely.
Okay.
So blonde,
makes it much
no.
less confusing.
Yeah.
Let's go with that. Okay. Decided, sorted. All right, we better do the last one of these picky things because we're running out of time.
Sorry, yes. And so one of the things that from my editor's thing is you actually you as an author's responsibility is to try and understand what the theme of the story is and what your voice is and how does it match up with the stories you're told, and not only with this individual story that you may be working on or I may be helping out on, but, you know, fitting it into your overall career and the context of your writing, because it's somewhat minor, but, you know, really when I finish a book, I ask the author a lot of times, so what was your theme here? Was it independence, growth? Was it, you know, Beauty and the Beast theme? Was it, you know, a fairy tale? Was it overcoming? And a lot of times the author can't really answer that. And I'm like, but this is something, and it could be kind of cutesy, I guess, in some ways, but I think it is, you know, something the author needs to keep in mind, put it up on the wall along with her character sketches or outline. What are you trying to tell with this story? Are you trying to tell of achieving, of overcoming? Are you trying to tell of awakening? Are you trying to tell of independence? Like, you know, there has to be some kind of theme word for you with this particular story. And then I think you should kind of capture them for you as your brand or your career or your own author's voice, so that when you're struggling, you can look at the words of the books or the phrases, you know, the one sentence or the phrase or the word of the books that you've written, and then see what they're all coming together. And then when you're stuck on your next book, you can look at that and say, okay, for my brand, for my voice, for my characters, this is something I need to work on, and then develop it that way. And it's kind of intangible, and it's a little airy-fairy in ways, and it's not like a grammar or getting rid of these words. But I think, you know, the strongest authors who are the most compulsive ones you want to read do have that quality. And I think starting it as early as possible in your career and understanding that this is part of your voice and this is part of your brand. When authors struggle to figure out their voice, this is a key element. Like, what is the theme of the stories they're told? What does that mean for the next story they're going to tell? And so it's a little airy-fairy, it's a little casual, but intangible. But I think it's something that an author should sit down, you know, after every book or before every book, and try and figure out, you know, where is she going with this story and how does it fit into her larger career?
Yeah, I think that's important, and we don't always see it initially. Like, I think maybe once you've got 2 or 3 books under your belt, you might be able to kind of look and say, okay, what is the common theme for what's happening in my books? And yeah, I just, like, for me, I realized that I had a lot of characters who had hidden powers that they didn't know about their powers, and it was kind of something that they found out, and they seemed ordinary, but actually in the end it turned out they were quite powerful and had they became powerful and all whatever, blah blah blah. But and so that was kind of an interesting kind of thing to realize after I'd written sort of 10-15 books by the time I realized that was actually a really common theme in all my books. In fact, every single one of my books has a character who has hidden power and has to figure it out, which maybe is something else I have to look at. Maybe that's like having a chapter where she gets knocked out every time. But and I know another author is Stephanie Holmes, and I know she has some of a theme. So she doesn't always do the same genre, but she definitely has like a kind of, I think she calls it gothic romance kind of thing. Like, she has like this kind of cool kind of gothic vibe, and it's romance. So she always has a romance in it, whether it's the different genres of romance, but she keeps that as a theme across the thing. And I think that works really well for her. I don't know if that's quite what you mean in terms of the tone or the feel. Yeah, but that's
I remember, name dropping here completely, but I remember when we spent the afternoon with Jane Ann Krentz, you like that, just throw that in there. She came to New Zealand, and we were very fortunate to have a kind of a small session with her, just to talk with her, and she talked about,
I missed that. I missed Jane Ann Krentz.
Well, this is what happens when you move out of Auckland. I'm sorry, but you know,
it must have been before my time, because I would have been
no, it
there.
wasn't.
No, she just wanted to speak to the more popular speakers.
I'm pretty sure she said don't invite Trudy. But
Okay.
anyway, my memory's a little vague on that one. But she talked about her core story, which I'm guessing would be probably fit the same thing. And she said it again, it was somebody else that pointed it out to her, and it went across her what's her historical name? Amanda
Quick.
Jane
Castle,
and it was the same
and
through all her different Jane Castle, Jane Ann Krentz books as well, regardless of the genre, and it was the same core story. So yeah, but it took somebody else to point that out to her, and then she's like, now I get it.
And that's very true. Yeah. I would read both of those. I read historical and her contemporaries, and it's because it's the same sort of story that I like.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I'm wondering if you're new again and you're thinking, I don't know how to identify this. Maybe look at the books that really like your keeper's shelf, and possibly there's a commonality with those regarding what's behind the underlying theme that you're really drawn to.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is quite a hard thing to spot, don't you think? Do you think? I mean, it's probably easier for you as an editor to read someone's stuff and go, this is what they are. But as the author, we're sort of like, can't see the wood for the trees.
In some ways, yeah, it is, because you're also developing your voice and adjusting it and changing it, particularly early in your career. But by asking yourself, what is the theme of this book? And then I usually throw out, if I'm doing like a deeper developmental edit, like these are the 3 themes that I'm seeing in this book, or is it trust or vulnerability or whatever. So whenever there's a point in your book where you have to make a decision and you look at what is your theme of your book, that's going to inform that decision, and it's going to make it easier to come up with what the choice is going to be and the things are going on. If you have an idea of what your common core is, or your common elements of your stories, it also, when you're writing your next story, it's going to make a little bit easier if you have an idea like, this is my ideal story and I can tweak it in this direction, but if I go far away from this quality, will it resonate with my readers in the same way, or will I have to pull it somewhat different? So I think it's worthwhile to sit down at the end of your book, at the beginning of your book, and look at what the theme of the story that you've written in 1 or 2 sentences, 1 or 2 words, and kind of keep building on that, so that when you're 4 or 5 books down, it will help you identify your voice more easily.
I like that.
Yeah, good. I think that's good advice. Awesome. See, I knew we were right to get you on the show.
Your
genius advice
to Matrice for hours and hours and hours, and we have.
But unfortunately,
but we better let the poor woman
have a break from us. But Matrice, thank you so much for being with us here today.
I've really enjoyed it. I love talking about these books, and I love talking about writing in general. I mean, as I said, I am not a writer. I never could be a writer, but I just love the whole process of creativity, imagination, and the commitment that authors have to getting to the end of that book. Not once, not twice, but 10 or 15 or more times is always quite remarkable to me. So, I appreciate all the stuff that you write in order that I can read it.
That's awesome. Thank you. So if someone wants to work with you, where can they find you, or even just find out more information?
Sure. My website is goodstorieswelltold.com. So I am a little behind on updating it for the past 2 years, but the email is there. Matrice at goodstorieswelltold.com, MATRICE. And I've kind of fallen off social media a little bit, but I'm hoping to go back, and I do check out Twitter, and even if I don't post much, I do, catch up on what's going on and things like that. So those are all places that you'll be able to see and check me out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I can wholeheartedly, oh my God, can't speak, recommend Matrice. She's an awesome editor, and I value everything you've done for me. And
thank you very much. I've enjoyed the stories. Yes.
Yeah. So so some of you can go check her out, not all of you, because then she'll get too busy and she won't be able to work with me in my books, but some of you are allowed. Otherwise, where can we be found, Shah?
So we can be found at spagirlspodcast.com, and that's got our archive of all 341 by the time you listen to this episode on there. We haven't been doing it for 25 years, quite as long as Matrice, but in podcast years, I'm saying we have, because I feel like every year on a podcast is like 7 years in real time.
Seems reasonable.
And we're also on Patreon at patreon.com/SpaGirlsPodcast, and you can welcome to join us there, and we would really appreciate your support. And the $10 tier, come along and join our Spa Girls Superstars community, where we will be going live in there at fairly regular times and talk about the nuts and bolts of what we're doing behind the scenes and helping out with self-publishing questions.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Thank you, Matrice, again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I've had a wonderful time again. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners for listening to another episode of the Spa Girls podcast. We'll be back again next week. But for now, farewell.
Bye.
Well, bye.